The following section covers additional scoring scenarios, including one-to-one match, manual checking, and placing multiple image procedures individually or via an order set. In a one-to-one match scenario, the provider enters the reason for exam on the edit screen in the same fashion as previous scenarios. However, if the reason for exam exactly matches a predefined clinical indication supplied by the NDSC and the procedure receives an appropriate score, the provider sees a message appear indicating an AUC check is taking place, but the provider is not launched to the UI and continues the ordering session without ever seeing an AUC check take place. However, in the background, the procedure is scored. Despite the user interface not being launched, AUC criteria is still stored on the order. The AUC button via the Edit screen allows the provider to view the imaging appropriate use criteria information. This information is also stored on the order's audit trail. It is important to note that a procedure does not need to receive a score of 9 for a one-to-one match to occur. Each hospital can work with the NDSC during the implementation process to identify the scores that trigger a one-to-one match. For example, procedures with a score of 7 to 9 can be set up to trigger a one-to-one match. Providers may manually enter imaging appropriate use criteria directly on the imaging AUC screen via the Edit screen for eligible procedures. This information is stored with the order in the same fashion as all previous scenarios. Based on setup, explained later in the tutorial, procedures can be enabled for automatic checking, manual entry, or both. The manual process is also utilized in scenarios in which a patient's primary care provider orders an advanced imaging exam to be performed at the hospital. In this scenario, the original ordering provider is required to perform the AUC check and communicate the AUC values to the hospital via fax, paper order, or another form of communication. Subsequently, the user entering the order into Meditech, the scheduler or the ITS technologist, for example, can enter the AUC values manually. This process is explained individually by application throughout the tutorial, and additional information regarding the manual process and the scenarios in which it can be utilized is provided in the Supporting Information section of our Imaging Appropriate Use Criteria Customer Resource Center. Imaging Appropriate Use Criteria checks function in the exact same fashion within an order set and when multiple imaging exams are placed individually. From the View Order Set screen, the AUC button is located to the right of the Edit button for qualifying procedures. The user interface is launched by clicking the AUC button. The subsequent workflow is identical to the workflow for placing individual orders, and all information is stored on the individual order. In scenarios where multiple imaging exams require an AUC check, the user interface is launched for each order individually. Despite the potential for query responses to carry over from one procedure to the next, each individual procedure requires a score. It is also important to note that AUC checking is disabled within the queued orders in OE hold queue routines.